I'm Kim St. Jean. I'd like to welcome you to my class on fold forming. Fold forming is a technique of texturing developed by Charles Luton Brain. Today we're going to use Charles's technique in folding and texturing metals to create a cuff bracelet and a pod necklace. You'll get to do two different types of folds, and we'll have some emphasis on ways that you can modify these folds to use them in various styles of jewelry that you would be interested in making. I really enjoy the fold forming because it moves the metals in ways that inspire design ideas and techniques for me. It has a very organic finished product look. It makes the metal speak to me. It speaks to other people. It raises a lot of interest. People really, they don't understand how you can really manipulate metal because they think metal is so rigid and unmoving, and then when they see what you can do and how easily manipulated and forgiving metal is, it's just like a magical step in texturing. All right. Let's get started. This is a lot of fun, so eat your Wheaties and let's go. These are the tools that we'll be using in the first part of the fold forming lesson. I have a rubber mat that I like to work on. We do some texturing on this today, repoussé type texturing. We have a soft blow hammer. We have a cross peen hammer. We have a 2-pound brass mallet. We have a kitchen knife without any teeth. We have a bench block. We have a metal vise that we clamp the first fold in to texture along the top of the fold. And we have some design stamps to add some texture to the piece of metal. And I also have a very small dap from my dapping block set. These are the hand tools that we'll be using in this project. We have a frets hammer. We'll be using the small rounded section here, and we'll also be using the chasing section for when we finish off the pearl head pin. We'll be using the wire cutters, a 1.8 millimeter hand punch, a pair of metal shears, round nose pliers, chain nose pliers, and bracelet bending pliers. These are the cleanup tools that we'll be using. We'll be using a metal file, a soft bristle brass brush, a coarse sanding sponge, and 4/0000 steel wool. We will be using a kiln brick, copper tongs, spare axe for pickle, a Blazer butane torch. You will need to have your butane. We will also be using a quenching bowl to quench our metals once they're fired, and we will be using a mini pickle pot or crock pot for our pickle. Just as a reminder, I want to point out a couple of the safety issues whenever you're using a torch or any other activity that could cause some danger to you. In using a torch, you always want a protective surface. I have these rubber mats, but you could use like a cookie sheet or some kind of, they sell some metal sheeting at hardware stores that you would put down to protect your table surface. You want to consider safety glasses whenever working with any kind of chemicals, flames, flying parts. You want to have a fire extinguisher of some sort at hand. You don't want it up under your table. You want it to where you can reach it easily and not have to go like through the fire to get it. So you want to have it within reach, but sort of away from your torching table. You also want to make sure you're working in a place where there's even airflow, some ventilation. This doesn't have to be anything big and exotic, but just something so that you've got fresh air coming in and out of your room. All right, these are the materials we're going to use in our activity today. This is a 24 gauge sheet of copper. This is generally how it comes when you order it. It's a 6x6 sheet. And for this project today, I cut it with my shears 1.5 inches wide by 6 inches long because that's the length of the sheet itself. Also, conveniently for us, that is what your standard cuff length is. So the majority of your customer base or your family or whatever are going to wear 6-inch cuff bracelets. So you're going to cut it whatever width you want. It doesn't have to be as thick, as wide as 1.5 inch, but that's what I did in the example. We're going to use a faceted freshwater red pearl. We're going to use about 6 inches of 16 gauge copper wire, and we're going to use about 3 inches of 20 gauge copper wire. Okay, so we have our 24 gauge copper sheet, and we're going to make our first fold. And I recommend that you don't have to map out all of your folds, but if you're going to do one long horizontal fold, you want to do this fold first, because if you do your smaller folds and then you go back in and you try to do your long fold, where you folded the short folds and where the long fold are going to intersect, that metal is going to be very, very hard to bend, even though it's annealed. So if you're going to do a long fold, do it first. And I'm kind of a creature of habit, so I always put one long fold in. And I don't necessarily try to get it directly in the middle. You can do that if you'd like, but I just kind of take my fingers and bend it. Now, this has not been annealed yet. This, when I purchased it, was considered dead soft, so I should be able to do my first fold prior to annealing. If you can't get this folded, then you have the option of annealing. You can also, if your fingers aren't strong enough to fold it, you can lock it in a vise and tap it over with a soft blow hammer and then continue to fold your first fold. But I start in the center and I make my fold and I get it over. Now, I've done this for a while, so my hands are pretty tough, but you can see I have it kind of folded down the center. And like I said, I don't really worry so much if it's not exact, but I'll give it just a little squeeze. Okay, and then I take a soft blow hammer, and it can be your plastic, your rawhide, wood, whatever, but you don't want to use a metal hammer on this because we're not wanting to make any permanent marks in the metal. I start tapping this down, and you can see here it didn't come all the way down. Like I said, I'm not that worried about that, but I can tap on the top and get it to come in a little bit closer. Okay, now I'm going to bring in a bench block to get this down just a little bit better. Now, I don't want to make my first crease really, really, really tight. That is an option you have. You can do a real tight one. You can even roll it through a rolling mill and get it just really crisp. But I'm going to make this one just stay a little bit open because I'm going to texture along the seam. But I'm going to go in just a little bit more. And that looks pretty good right there. Now I'm going to lock this in a vise and I'm going to texture along my seam here. Okay, we're going to take our folded piece of metal and we're going to lock it into a vise. And this is just a little 2.5 inch vise, one of my flea market jewels. And it is toothless, which is really nice. And what you want to do is you don't want to put your piece in flush, but you don't want to have it raised way up in the air either. You want it just so that the fold is sticking out of the vise about 1/16 of an inch. Just enough so that you can put some texture down the seam, but not have the metal fold over while you're texturing. Okay, and I'm going to start at the end here and I'm going to texture down, and I'm just going to use a little straight line stamp here, and I'm going to start at the end, and you want to use your rules of stamping, and I'm going to start right down here. And I'm just going to gently move down the line. And you can see I've got these little lines in here. And I'll go all the way to the end of the vise. Adding stamp. And you can see here, we've got this texture along, and this just adds a little bit of interest to the seam that's going to be in our first fold. Okay, now that we have our texture all the way down the seam of our copper, we're going to need to anneal this to get it open, because I have really work hardened this crease, and to be able to open this and work on it some more would be very difficult with it the way it is. So I'm going to anneal it so that I can open it and then put some more lines in it. To anneal, what we're going to do is we're going to use a brick in this case. And before you start, you can use a brick, you can use pumice stone, you can use charcoal, but you want to have some kind of a surface that you can anneal on. And I prefer surfaces like this or pumice that do not retain the heat. Bricks and all that retain heat in your studios can become dangerous because they retain the heat for a long amount of time. We're going to use a little blazer torch. You can use a MAP gas torch, a acetylene torch, whatever torch that will get up to a hot enough flame to anneal such a large piece here, but we're going to use a little blazer today. Right now we have the lights bright so you could see this, but we're going to dim the lights while I'm annealing so that you can actually see the process, because what we're looking for when we anneal copper is a red glow, which you're going to go to a much hotter temperature than you would with if you were annealing sterling, because if you got to the temperature with sterling that we're going to get to with this copper, your sterling would melt. So we're going to have a red glow, and the red glow is going to follow my torch evenly all the way down so that I get a good even anneal all the way. So I've got this torch as large of a flame as it's going to go, and I'm going to hold the torch in my non-dominant hand. You want to get in the habit of having your torch in your non-dominant hand, because you're going to be manipulating tools in your dominant hand. And another tip that I have is always have a tool in your dominant hand so you're not ever tempted to reach out and move the metal with your fingers, because you will forget, and that's just a natural reaction. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come in and I'm going to gently start heating the metal all the way down. And the hottest part of your flame is about 1/4 inch from the end of the blue cone. You don't want to go all the way down like this, because that's not, that black area you see is actually a space in the flame where there's no heat. You want to come up to where you're about 1/4 inch away from the flame, and notice all the cool colors that the copper is turning. Well, it will turn red through the heat patina phase. That is not annealed. That is just the color changing in the copper. So what we're looking for is a glow. And I'm bringing it out, and I'm going to start looking for the glow. And because copper is a conductor of heat, you have to kind of heat the whole thing. You can't just start at one end, because what will happen is while you're heating one end, it's conducting the heat, it's dispersing the heat to the other end, and so it's constantly in a cooling phase. So we'll get down and start concentrating a little bit slower. And I really want to make sure that my seam is what is in a good glowing state. And the smaller torch you have, the longer it's going to take. If you had a big MAP gas torch or an acetylene bee tank, or even a bigger handheld torch, it would go a little bit faster, but you use the torch that you're comfortable with. Okay, we're getting to a glow here. And you should be seeing the glow. See the glow of the red. And the glow is following my torch. And like I said, I'm really focusing on my seam, because that's where I work hardened it. There's my glow. And my glow's following my torch. I'm just going to come down one more time, just to make sure. And we've built up a lot of fire scale on here. So we're not going to worry about that right now. We will get this all annealed and then quench and then do the rest of our hammering. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. And when you're picking up, this is a long piece of metal. When you're picking it up with your tweezers or your tongs, you want to make sure you pick it up so that it won't swing around. You don't want this to swing around and hit your hand. So make sure you have it in a nice position to where you can go straight to a quench bowl and cool it down. Now it's going to sputter. You might want to wait a few seconds so it doesn't sputter all over the place, but it's going to make this really cool sound and it's going to be cool, and a lot of that fire scale will come off. There was the sound, and this is what it looks like now. And we're not going to worry about all that discoloration until we're all finished and ready to clean it up, because it would just be redundant. You would be cleaning and fire scaling and cleaning and fire scaling. So just wait and do it all at once. Okay, I have my metal here. It's all annealed and quenched and dried off, and now I'm going to open it up so that I can inspect my first texture fold and put some more folds in. And what I'm going to do, I have a bench block here, and you want a nice smooth surface so that the metal will slide as you're opening it. And you're going to need what I use is just a kitchen knife. I want one with, if at all possible, without any serrated edge on it. You don't want to mark up your metal, and you don't want to take any chances of cutting yourself. I've tried an oyster knife. I thought it was the answer to everything, but the oyster knives tend to be a little bit fatter, and sometimes I couldn't get it into some of my smaller creases. So I went back to a utility knife. And don't go messing up your silverware set. Go to Goodwill, Salvation Army, someplace like that. You can pick these up for 25 cents or less or more all the time. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to come in my crease and open it up. Let me move this so you can see. And you can see here I have this crease here, and I want to make sure that gets nice and open. Then I'm going to come to the other end, and I'm going to do the same thing. This one's really tight, but open it up. Get that top up there really open. You don't want that to fold over on you. And then I just kind of start peeling it open with my fingers gently. And please be careful, when you were cutting your piece of metal, if you had any little burrs along the edges, get rid of those so that you don't take any chances in cutting your hands while you're doing this. Now you can see I have it partially open here. So what I'm going to do now, and if this was like, if I had maybe had this seam sticking up out of my vise a little high and this wanted to fold over, you want to make sure that this doesn't fold over. So the way you can do that is you can put it on a 90-degree sharp edge of your vise or your bench block, and just kind of tap that corner open, and that way you are sure that it won't fold over on you in the opening process. All right, now I have a nice surface here. I have it fairly open. And I'm going to take a soft blow hammer. Again, plastic, rawhide, wood, just something that's not going to change. And you can see here, this is really a deep groove here, and this is kind of a shallow one. I don't want this to fold over, so I'm going to put it here on the edge of my vise. And just gently open it up, all right, and then slide. And again, I'm going to put this over here, gently open up my crease, put it on here, and slide. And it may sound like I'm hitting this hard, but I'm not, and you'll be able to see in just a second. Okay, there's my first line. You can see what it did down through here, but there's our first crease in our piece. Now I've work hardened it somewhat by hammering it and pulling it open, but not so much that I can't just go straight to my next fold. To make sure that you get the corners open completely, you can put this on the 90-degree edge of your bench block and open it up along that 90-degree crease so that you don't get any folding over. Okay, so I'm going to put a couple more folds in, and I'm going to come down here to the end, and I'm going to put kind of a cross fold in right there. Okay, and this is the back. So the back, you have valleys, and on the front you have mountains. And I prefer the mountains, so I do all of my folds in one direction so that when I'm through I have all mountains on my finished product. If you like the valleys, you could fold this one up and over this way so that you would get a valley instead of all mountains, but that's personal preference. And so I have that fold in there. So I'm going to bring my bench block in. I'm going to have my soft blow hammer, and I'm going to just hammer that down. Okay, now I can put this fold into the piece, and I can put another fold into the piece without having to go and anneal, as long as I don't fold a fold. So I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to put another fold in down here, and I'm going to go the opposite direction here, and I'm going to put it in right there. So I didn't have to fold this, anneal it, open it, and then fold this, anneal and open it. I could do this crease and this crease and not have to anneal in between them because they're not folding each other. Now what I cannot do, or I do not recommend, is to go in and then fold again here, because that's just really going to overwork these joints and they're going to split open. Now after I texture this, I may still get a little hole in here, but when I open it all up, to me it kind of adds a little interest, and it kind of closes back up when you open it. I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to use a different hammer to texture here. Instead of locking this in the vise and putting texture across the top, I'm going to just add texture along the line. Now you don't have to. You could just go in and leave this as a straight line. Texturing your lines is totally optional. You don't have to put any texture in if you don't want to. So I'm going to bring this in, and I'm going to get a hammer to texture along the edges. Alright, I'm going to use what I call just a little cross peen here. This is going to move the metal out and away from me to add some interesting texture here, kind of a ruffled look. You can use whatever you want, but this just happens to be what I've chosen for today. And I'm going to start here at the top, because when you use a cross peen type hammer, your metal moves horizontally and laterally. So I'm going to make short little hammer strokes that's going to push the metal out. So I'm going to start here at my line. I'm not going to hammer on my line. I'm going to start right beside it. And I'm going to hammer out. And I'm going to keep them very close. Okay, so I've added some texture there. Now I'm going to come to the other side and texture across that way. And if you notice, I was moving the metal, not the hammer. Try to keep your hammer strokes in the same location and move your metals, and you'll get a much better texture. Now I can turn this over and texture the other side as well, or I can leave it plain, but by turning it over and texturing the other side, I will hammer down some of my original texture. But I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit on this side. Okay, and I've got that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side, and then I'm going to anneal and open this up. So I've got my torch, and again it's in my non-dominant hand, which for me is my left hand. I have a pair of tweezers or tongs in my right hand so that I won't absent-mindedly reach out and flip the metal with my hands. You laugh, but when you do it, you won't. And I can really just concentrate on the ends here because this is where I did the work. The middle really didn't have too much done to it. I'll hit it just a little bit so that I can make one more fold. And you can make as many folds as you would like. I'm going to do basically 4, the one down the center, and then 3 across. I'm going to flip this so I can get some heat on the other side. Alright, I have my second and third fold in my piece of metal, and I'm going to open it, and I've annealed it and I've quenched it. I have still not cleaned it yet. So I've annealed it, I've quenched it, and now I'm going to open up the corners. And I hammered this down really, really tight. So I've got to be really, really careful on opening my, my ends and making sure they don't fold over. So I'm going to come in with my knife. And you can see right there, see how that's really tight right there? So I want to make sure I can get that open all the way so that I can still have a nice straight line. So I'm going to open it just a little bit here, but I'm not going to pull it all the way open because see here how this is wanting to go down and then this is coming up. See how it's coming down and then up? I want to make sure I get this open. So this is where I'm going to bring in my bench block again with the nice straight edge, and I'm going to put this crease right here on the 90-degree edge and make sure that that opens. If not, my piece will come like this and then it'll step down and then go across, and I'll have a zigzag instead of a nice straight bracelet. So you want to try to avoid that if at all possible. So what I'm going to do, I need this a little higher so I can get my piece down there. So I'm just going to stack it on another one. And see, I have that crease there and I'm trying to get rid of this dip right here. So I put that on there. I use a soft blow. And see that opened that nice and neatly there. And the same thing here. It's wanting to fold, so I don't want that zigzag in my metal. So I'm going to just open that up so I get a nice flat open. And now I can use my soft blow to open this up. And I'm just gently tapping. I'm not obliterating my fold. You don't want to do that. So I've got that open, and I can turn it and open the other side, and then we're ready to do another fold if we want to. All right. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get these open and pickle them and show you what it looks like all finished. Okay, I have a pickle pot here, and what it is, it's just a small little crock pot, and inside we have water and we have the pickle solution here, and I'm just going to put this in. And the amount of time that it takes to clean the bracelet really depends on how much fire scale you've got on it and how much pickle, how strong you've made your solution. But you can put it in, and it's one of those things that you could walk away, go to the restroom, answer the phone, whatever. It's not going to hurt the metal to sit in there for a little while. And the longer it sits, the cleaner it's going to get. But that's really for your judgment to see. When you put it in, as you can see, it's already cleaning. But you can leave it in as long as you'd like and make sure that it gets nice and gets all that fire scale off. It's going to come out and you'll notice that it looks pink now. It doesn't really look like nice shiny copper anymore, and I call this the shrimp skin look, because this to me looks like boiled shrimp when it floats to the top of your pot and it's ready to be eaten, and it's got this nice satiny pink look. That's what I look for to make sure that my copper is nice and clean, is that shrimp skin look. This is a new pot of pickle that we made this morning, so you can see there's still a little bit of the powder that has not dissolved yet. What we do for the amount that you use, it's like 1/8 of a cup of the pickle solution to a cup of water is a good amount. It needs to be warm. That's why we're using a crock pot. It's not effective if it's not warm. And you notice I'm using copper tongs. You want to keep non-ferrous metals with non-ferrous metals in this solution. Because we're using copper, it's not as a big a deal as if this was sterling sitting in here, because you don't want to inadvertently copper plate your sterling. But you want to get in the habit of using copper tongs or brass tongs, or if you can afford them, sterling silver tongs in your pickle solution. But copper is the most commonly used. And we're getting this nice and clean here. Okay, I have the metal out of the crock pot. I've straightened it back out. I had it bent just a little bit so it would fit in the smaller crock pot. And now I have it all folded, all straightened back out. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a brass brush, a very soft bristle brass brush, and water. And I'm going to scrub this to get rid of what I explained to you as shrimp skin. What the shrimp skin is it's just the copper kind of standing at attention, and it's not shiny any longer. So by using the brass brush, I'm going to be able to burnish down all of that metal so that it will be the shiny copper that you are accustomed to seeing. So I have a brass brush, I have some water on it, and I'm just going to brush across here. It's nice and shiny again. I'll hit the back real fast. I always recommend your backs looking as close to as good as your fronts as possible. And get this all nice and clean. And there you have the nice shiny copper again. And I will dry this off. And then we're ready to use some designer stamps and get our piece looking really awesome. As you can see, I have my first initial seam all the way down the front. Then I have my 2 seams here. I could have put a line in here. I could have put another line straight across. I could do a line coming horizontally across, although to fold a fold, again, when you're getting 3 folds, it's very difficult, and a lot of times you'll get a hole in the center if you're not very careful. But I could put more lines in here if I want. But for today, we're just going to jump right into using the stamps and get some neat looking designs in this, and then we'll do our filing and our shaping and all the fun stuff that gets it all finished. You're going to need a bench block, and if you have a nice smooth bench block, you're not going to transfer the scratches and all of the bench block to the back of your piece. Not that in this piece it's that big of a deal, because generally you don't look at the inside of a cuff bracelet anyway. But we're going to use this, and we're going to use some stamps, and I'm going to show you a couple unique ways to texture. The first one that I want to show you, actually, I'm not going to use the bench block. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to, this is my front, obviously, but I'm going to turn my piece over onto the back, and I'm using a rubber mat here. Now, this is my favorite work surface. It's about a 1/2 inch rubber mat. It's self-healing, sound absorbing, heat resistant. It's just something that I like to use. It helps me keep my metals from sliding, and I also do sort of a repoussé texturing on this, whereas I'm going to have this upside down. I'm going to use just one of my very small dapping punches, and I'm going to put marks in the metal so that they are raised up the top rather than the traditional ones that go down into the metal. So you want to, of course, go back to how to properly hold your stamps so that they don't jiggle around. You don't want to do this number. You want to be able to completely hold it, and you're going to come in and you're going to stamp. And I'm going to put some interesting variations in here, kind of just random around. And when I turn this over, I have this bumpy edge out here, and I call this frog skin. This is like one of my favorites right now. And then what I usually do, just because it's the way I like to do things, is if I have this one textured like this, then I usually come over and I texture this one in a similar way. But you've seen me do this one, so we're going to just jump right into another texture in one of the other squares. Okay, I've removed the rubber mat because I'm not doing any kind of a repoussé type texture now, and I'm directly on the tabletop and I have my bench block. You really want to work on as solid a surface as you can to get the most out of your hammering and the most out of your design stamps. And I have a little bit of a ruffle here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hammer that down. I've flattened my surface, and I'm going to work with a design stamp, and I'm going to just go right along the edge here and create a border along this one edge of my piece of metal. And I support my stamps with all 4 fingers, and I use my pinky kind of as a rudder to make sure everything goes nice and smoothly. And I'm going to use the 2-pound brass hammer like this so that I get nice heavy blows to get a good impression. You can't be a girly girl with this. You have to really give it a good impression. And I suggest 1 solid stamp. You don't want to sit there and hit it multiple times, because each time you hit it, you have the opportunity to create shadows by the stamp moving. So I'm going to come along here and put some texture in. Using a designer stamp. And as creative as you get with your design stamps is up to you. That's where everybody's work becomes individual. All right, and now I'll pick up just one more to kind of give you some ideas of how you can use multiple ones. This one is like a little circle. I'm going to come right here to the edge with it. And if you notice, my hammer doesn't move. My hammer's always been in the same spot. It's my texture stamp and my metal that moves. And you can come in and do all kinds of neat textures on your piece. As you can see, this is a different piece of metal than one that I was doing the demo with a while ago. I switched to this one so that you could see a little bit more of the options you have. I put a line in here to complement the ones that I put here and across. I put one in there, and I have my sections, and I did my frog skin here, and then I reversed it and did the frog skin here and here, so I have opposites here. And I did a little texture on the edge, and I'll show you how that texture was done. I used this little cross peen hammer, okay, and you can use, if you don't have one of these but you have a riveting hammer that you don't rivet with the straight edge anymore, you can file down the edges and make it into a hammer that will do this texture. But I just started here, and I started at my seam just like I did on the fold, and I worked my way out. And notice the hammer didn't move, the metal did. Okay, and I did that on this side as well. Started here and came in and went there. Okay. And I don't like straight edges, so I went and I ruffled my edges here, and that was just by using a small rounded end of a hammer. So I took it here, and as I strike down, I pull, and so I pull out these ruffles. And I didn't want to do it on the whole thing, so I did it once again on opposing sides here. Hammered out a ruffle. Now that you've got all your hammering and your texturing done, you have to make sure that it is safe for somebody to wear. So we're going to file and clean this up. I'm going to use a metal file. This is a number 2 metal file. This is my favorite size for filing on metals, and because I'm using a metal file, I'm going to file in one direction only, not back and forth. I'm going to support my metal on a surface. I'm going to come in and I'm going to hold and you want to hold your file with your finger so that your finger is your guide, and I start kind of like this and I roll over the top, and that gives me a nice rounded edge. So I start here and I roll over the top. And again, you can see I'm moving the metal as well as moving my file. Okay, and then I flip it over to take off any burr, and it's the same thing there. And now I'll do this side. And flip. I'll do that on all the sides here. And then, because I ruffled this edge, I want to make sure, and I've got these folds here, you want to make sure that there's not any sharp edges. So what I like to do is I take a coarse sanding sponge. Now this sanding sponge was about this long when I purchased it, and I cut it into 3 sections. That way it fits in my hand nice, and I end up using the entire sponge rather than just around the edges. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the side, and I'm going to file down over the edge, top, over the edge, and that's going to take all these sharp edges off of my piece. And I'm going to go all the way around, and then I'm going to flip it over and go all the way around. Okay, and if you feel here where you might have kind of a sharp edge, you can take your file and just kind of get rid of those. Okay, shouldn't be too many. You remember I mentioned mountains and valleys? See, this is my front, and I have all mountains. They all come up. But this is what the valleys look like. You get these creases. So you can do either way. You can go mountains, valleys, you can do both. But I've got my piece here, and now what I'm going to do is decide what I'm going to make out of it. This is the now what, which is really the most difficult part of the fold forming. You get these beautiful organic textured shapes, and then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. You have a lot of options here. This one I could take and I could cut it across here. Take a baling plier and roll this down and make a bail, and it would make a really nice pendant. I could cold connect on a stone. I could cold connect some elements on. I could have that as the pendant, and then take this part up here, cut it, add a little bit more texture, make a pair of earrings out of what was left up here, or make 2 pendants. There's all kinds of options when you do this. You just have to kind of look at it and marinate on it a little bit and decide what you're going to do. But for today, because we all like a finished product, we're going to make a cuff bracelet out of it. So I'm going to take this piece, and I'm going to take a tool called a bracelet bending plier. Okay, and I'm going to start in the center line here, in the center of the bracelet, and when I'm holding it here, it should be a frowny face. When you look at your plier, you have the eyeballs up here and you see a frowny face. So we're going to take the frowny face and we're going to start in the center, and we turn. You can see it's already started a nice curve, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to move in very tight increments, and I'm going to move all the way down to the end, and you can see I'm getting the start of a nice curve. Now I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to go the other way. Nice small curves. Okay, that gives me this initial shape. Well, that's not really a very good cuff, so I'm going to go in, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to tweak it a little bit. So I'm going to come in, and as I'm pinching, I'm also giving little twists with my wrist. Okay. And then that gives me a nice cuff. Now you could go to a bracelet mandrel and do this. I can go from this stage here, go to a bracelet mandrel and give it just a little smoother shape, or it's perfectly fine the way it is. But if you do not have bracelet bending pliers, you can do this over a bracelet mandrel, a juice can, a baseball bat. You can form a bracelet, a rolling pin. You can be really creative with ways to form a cuff bracelet. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a liver of sulfur patina. We're going to clean that off, and then I always tumble mine for about an hour. That really burnishes the high spots, and it work hardens the bracelet so that it will keep its shape when being worn. Here's our cuff, and we have used a liquid liver of sulfur patina solution, and it is quite black now. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some 4/0 steel wool, and that's 4/0, it's 0000 steel wool, and we're going to remove the excess of this because we don't want it to stay black. Black is an option that you can leave on there, but we want to see the beautiful copper. We want to add, I like patina to add highlight and shadow and dimension to my texture, and it makes it just really jump out at you. Love it. I still get amazed every time I do this at what happens because they're never the same. And I'm just gonna take this off. Now this is steel wool. This is not a Brillo pad. This is not an SOS pad. It has no soap or anything on it. It's just steel wool. And you can find it usually where they sell the paint and sandpaper and stuff in a hardware store. Some people prefer the 3M pads. You can use those as well. And you want to hit the inside some too. And get some of that. Out of the inside. Now you're going to tumble it, or you can leave it just like this, kind of a matte finish, and you're going to want to seal it. My preferred method of sealing my metals is with Renaissance wax or some other microcrystalline wax that it's a polish that you put on. I put on with my finger, and then I let it dry, and then I can either leave it matte, or I can take a very soft cloth and buff it up. Or what I like to do is I like to throw this in the tumbler now, and what that will do is it will burnish all of these high spots and make them really shine, but it will leave my patina in my creases and textured areas, but it will also work harden the cuff so that it will keep its shape. But after it comes out of the tumbler, you still are going to want to seal it with something because, as you know, copper patinas very quickly, oxidizes very quickly. Now these are also beautiful done with your blue patinas and your green patinas, and you can get them, and what I do is I patina them and then I go in and I sand off areas so that the high points of my metal shows up. So there's a lot of really things, and I have even enameled these, but that's a whole different ball game. I'm just going to give you a little bonus fold this time. I'm going to take another 1.5 by 6 inch strip, but I'm going to be able to make multiple pieces out of this one if I want to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm just going to cut a piece. And you can go whatever size you want. This just seems like a good pendant size to me. I'm going to make a little pod pendant out of this. And remember, when you purchase your metal, it's normally in a dead soft state, so you should be able to put your first little fold in just with your fingers without annealing. So I'm going to fold this in half. All right, this is about 2 inches, and to me that's pretty much what you're going to want for a pendant. Also, if you've never really worked with hammers before, you don't want to go much smaller than this for the first one because you're going to be doing a lot of hammering, and you may be hammering your fingers as much as you're hammering the metal. So I would start out with at least a 2-inch piece just to get comfortable with the hammers. Then you can start going to smaller pieces. But I'm going to fold it in half. And like I said, I've done this a few times, so I'm usually pretty accurate at getting it as close as I need it to be, just with eyeballing my fold. But you're welcome to draw a line, put it in a vise, knock it over, if you feel the need to do that. But I just kind of folded it down here, and you can see I've got it folded nice and neat here. I'm going to move this out of the way for just a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, here is my open side, and here is my fold side, and I'm going to come up just about 1/8 of an inch from the fold, and I'm going to take a pair of shears, and I use pruning shears, but you can use whatever kind of metal shears you're comfortable with. And I'm going to take this, and starting at about 1/8 of an inch up, I'm going to cut, and I'm going to cut this in an arc. Okay, and I go to the top, and then I just come down, and I finish at about 1/8 of an inch from the end. You don't want to go all the way down to the fold, because that, if you're hammering there and you've got that fold right there and there's nothing to support it, you can make that crack. So it's always good to give you just a little bit at the top up here. So I've got this pod. I could trim this out a little bit more if I wanted to. Let's see, because it's kind of high here and low there. But we're trying to make something organic, so don't fret over it being perfect. You don't need to bring out your slide rule or pi minus whatever and all to do this. Just go for it. All right, so I have this nice little pod, this nice little arc shape. Now I have a choice. I can make two organic shapes. I can go with a leaf, or I can go with a pod, and I'm really partial to a pod. So for making a pod, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer on the fold, and it's going to create a pod. If I wanted a leaf, I would hammer on the cut, and I would get a leaf. And the reason for this is I'm going to use a specially shaped hammer. I'm going to use a hammer that is shaped like this, okay? And I call these a cross peen. You can use a forming hammer, but this has this nice straight line here. And when you use a hammer with a straight line, your metal will move in two directions. It will move horizontally across, in other words, so you can push it out straight, and it'll also move it up and down. All right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer on the fold, and I'm going to start here in the center, and I'm going to hammer, and I'm going to hammer very close together, and I'm going to, as I hammer, I'm going to push this side of the metal out. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to hammer here, and I'm going to push this side of the metal, and it's going to form an arc on this side, and this is going to stay the same, so it's going to pucker and cause it to be a little pod. If on the other side I had hammered on the cut, I would start here in the center, and I would push this, and then I would flip it, and I would hammer very close together and push this, and this would grow out this way. This would stay the same, so it would arc around and make a leaf. So you're doing basically the same technique. It's just whichever side you hammer on gives you a different shape. And today we're going to do the pod, so I'm going to hammer on the fold. I'm going to bring in my bench block, and I'm going to lay my bench block down, and I'm going to use the cross peen hammer, or the forming hammer, and I'm going to start here in the center, and I'm going to work my way out to the side. And since I'm better at hammering away from me, I always start in the center and push, and then I flip it, and I start in the center and I push. That way I get the most out of my hammering. Hold your hammer correctly. You want to use your hammer so that you're not holding it here. This is no good. You're not allowing the hammer to do any of its work. You want to hold the hammer down here where they've created a handle. So here we go, and I'm going to hold it. And I'm going to flip. I didn't get much movement here, so I'm going to do this again. And I'm going to flip. And when I open this up, it's going to create, you see I have a curve here. I could anneal this, hit it again, anneal it, hit it again, and get more and more of a curve. I could use a heavier hammer and get a more drastic curve, but we're just going to make a nice little pod here that would look really good with a bead or something hanging inside. So this one's ready to anneal and open. Now we're going to come in and we're going to anneal. Okay, here I have my piece and I have annealed it, I have quenched it, I have pickled it, I have dried it off. Now I'm going to open it. We're going to have the big reveal here. Again, I'm using just a kitchen knife, and if you have hammered this so much that you can't seem to get it open, you can kind of just give it a little twist and it'll open right up for you. But it's kind of like opening an oyster, not that I've ever done that, or an edamame pod, but we just kind of put our knife in there. And voila, we have a cute little pod. Okay, this is the pod that we did, and you can see all the really cool hammer marks in it. I went in and I ruffled it just a little bit with, first of all, I took a hammer and I kind of hammered the edges. You know, that's just me, I do that. And then I went in with a round nose plier and I kind of gave it just a little bit of a ruffle. Then we have this really neat shape now. Now what I'm going to do is decide, to me, which one looks like the top and which one looks like the bottom, and I've chosen this as the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a 1.8 hole punch plier, and I'm going to put a hole here on this side of the pod, and then I'm going to come over to the other side of the pod. Now I could have, if I knew exactly what I was going to do before I opened it, I could have put my hole in while this was closed and just come in. But normally when I'm opening a pod, it hasn't spoken to me yet and I really don't know what I'm going to do. So I usually wait, and if need be, I could close this back up and drill more holes. Like say I would decide I wanted to lash a bunch of beads inside, I could close this back up, put holes all down the vein, then come in here and wire wrap beads in. But I have to let the metal talk to me first. I'm going to take one of these lovely pearls, and I hate to cut the string, but that's the only way I'm going to be able to get it off. And these have a really nice teardrop shape, which is going to fit in there really nice. This is 20 gauge, and so we're going to take some 20 gauge wire. It fits in perfectly, and that's usually the drawback to using pre-drilled stones and things, is you really don't know if they're going to fit. Now, to hold the pearl on this head pin, this wire, I have a couple options. I can use the torch and I can draw a bead, or I can take my bench block and I can hammer out just a little paddle on the end here. So I think since we've already patinaed and everything, I'm going to use a chasing hammer, and I don't want to pick up texture from my block, so I want to use a nice smooth block. I wouldn't want to use a block that had a lot of dents in it because I want this to be smooth, and I want to use a hammer that is nice and smooth also without texture in it, because I'm wanting to paddle this out and make it glide into a paddle. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to hammer just a little paddle on the end, and that should be sufficient to hold this pearl. There we go. And see, now the pearl won't fall off, and that's kind of an interesting look. So I have the paddle, I have the pearl on the paddle. Now I'm going to hold it inside the pod, and this area right here in the pod I think is a great place for that pearl to rest. So I'm just going to kind of mark where I want it to be. I've got my round nose pliers, and I do my wrap a little unconventionally than what you would see if you went and you looked in the back of a magazine, or if you've gone and had lessons on wire wrapping. I don't do it the exact way the books say to do it, but it works for me. I'm comfortable with it. You're welcome to try it my way if you would like. But what I do is I hold my round nose pliers in my dominant and my non-dominant hands, and I choose where on the plier I want my loop to go, because it's a graduated cone, and if I go down here to the end I get a very small loop. The further I move up the plier I get a larger loop. So I want a loop that's going to be able to fit just a little bit larger wire through. So this is where I want to work, and this is basically my favorite spot on the plier. Now I'm going to take chain nose pliers in my dominant hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way to the top, because I don't want my pliers to get in the way. And you notice I'm all the way at the tip of my pliers. I'm not like this. This gets your pliers all in the way. I'm all the way to the tip, and I come towards me 90 degrees. I pivot my hand and I go up underneath the pliers, so you can see I've made a loop. Okay. Now I just come and wrap around, and there I have my wrap, and we're ready to cut this off. Okay. And I have my wrapped pearl. All right, so I'm going to lay this aside. I have a 6-inch piece of copper wire here that has already been oxidized, and it is 16 gauge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pearl and I'm going to go in one hole. I'm going to feed my pearl on. Then I'm going to go through the opposite hole. And I'm going to come to the middle. Now this wire there's overkill here, but I'd rather always be safe than sorry in my length. So I'm going to cross it over to where I get a nice looking bail on top there. Then where it crosses, I'm going to pinch. That gives me a place to wrap. I take my round nose pliers. I decide how big of a loop I want, so I'm going to go just a little bit deeper, and I'm going to bring this wire down, tuck it up underneath, and come all the way around so that I formed a loop like this. Now I'm going to bring these wires all the way around. So I have a nice wrap like this, and I hold it firmly, take my left hand and just kind of rev the motorcycle just a little bit. That makes that loop go straight up and down. Now I can come in with my cutters, and you always want to cut your cutters to where it looks like a plow here, not the flat side, but the indented side. Come in at an angle. So that it has an angle of a cut here that you can gently tuck in. And we have our pod pendant with a bail ready to add a chain, or to take the remainder of the pearls and maybe make a nice pearl necklace to go around the top, or a copper chain or a leather cord. But we have a nice little pendant here. On this step, what I want to do is I just want to give you some options for adding color to your finished product. And it can be in fold forming, it can be anything that you're working in with copper to add color. So we're going to work here, and if you notice, this is what I call the shrimp skin stage. This is the stage where I have done my folding, I've opened it, I've pickled it, I've rinsed it, dried it, but I have not shined the metal yet. And so I'm going to add some heat here and give you some color and let you see what this looks like. Now, the key to using a torch for color patina is that the color comes on the cool down. Let me say that again. Your color comes on the cool down. If you have a color that you absolutely adore, but you still have the flame on the metal, that color is 100% going to go away because the color comes on what? The cool down. So we're going to come in here and we're going to add just a little bit of color, of heat. And I really like to get my color to come on my fold. And I'm going to cool this just a little bit. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to heat just a little bit more. And now we start seeing the magic happen. The colors are coming. I'm going to add a little bit more heat. The colors are coming. I'm going to come over here and add. Let's see the purples and the pinks. But remember, it's on the cool down. Let's get a little bit of color here. There they are. And you get some really nice satin colors in there. And we're going to stop right there because it will continue to change as it cools some more. But you can see I have some metallic greens and blues in here. I have fuchsia, I have orange, I have really, but because I left this unpolished, they're all very satin. All right, now I have a piece that you recognize. We did this one in our demo, and we've cut it, and I have pickled it and rinsed it and then taken the brass brush and shined it real well. So now we're going to add some heat color to this on a shiny surface. So I'm going to start the torch, and when does the color come? The color comes on the cool down. So I'm going to just give this a little preheat, and I'm going to come away and let it cool just a little bit. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to add some more heat to my folds. Here comes my color. I'm going to add just some little bits here and there. I call this painting with flames. Look at the colors I'm getting here. It's like magic. But you can see the subtle difference in this and in the one that was not polished. These are going to be shinier. And there we go. We'll stop there and we'll see what kind of results we're going to get. Let's move the brick so you can see. And look at the great colors we have here. This is another piece that we cut, and I have liver of sulfured it. Then I have used my steel wool and gotten the liver of sulfur off. And now I'm going to add a heat patina on top of the liver of sulfur. And if you are someone like me that loves raku, this is the type of colors we're going to get on top of the liver of sulfur. It's going to have kind of that fall raku look. And you're going to see some sparks. That's the steel wool that's still on the piece. So don't be alarmed by that. And we're going to heat it up just a little bit. And I'm going to come in on my lines. And here comes my color. And you'll see these are darker fall colors. You'll get some rich imperial purples. Look at the pink in here. Okay, and it's more of a raku look. And this one went a little faster because my brick was warm. Now Now I'll hold this away from the brick so you can see some of the color. There you go. You got the blues, and the pinks, and the purples. Now what I want to do is I'm going to lay these down so that you can see all three different pieces. This is the unpolished, this is the polished, and then this is the polished and lip rib sulfured. So you get three very different looks. Now, to keep these colors, unfortunately, when you go and you seal these with your microcrystalline wax or even your spray-on acrylic wax, you're going to lose quite a bit of the pinks that are in this. So if it's your piece and you're just wanting to enjoy the color, I would say just enjoy it the way it is for as long as you can. And let's say it's your bracelet, and I have one customer, she does this, and it's hilarious. She has one bracelet and she'll wear it, and then she'll pull it out 2 or 3 weeks later and the color's not like what she wants. So she gets her cleaning cloth out, she cleans it real good, and then she hits it with a torch again and adds color. So it's virtually a different color every time I see her. You can seal it, but again, you're going to lose a lot of these really bright pinks that are in there. They're going to be very muted. It's going to be looking at it like through a screen that takes some of the color down. Same thing with this one. So you can just enjoy them while they're this way. They'll stay like this for a long time, but they will. What happens is they darken. The natural oxidizing process of the copper takes over and the colors darken somewhat. This one will last a little bit longer, but the same thing is it's going to darken. So you have your choices here. You seal it and lose a little bit of your color, or you leave it the way it is, enjoy it for as long as you can, and then just keep recoloring it. If you seal it, you cannot go back in and recolor it unless you sand it all off. So don't seal it and then think you'll be able to go back in and add heat again. It's not going to work. So just make sure you've chosen which one you're going to do. If you take these two now and you tumble them, you will also lose a lot of that color. So this is kind of a done deal once you go there. But have fun. You'll never get the same thing twice. Now I'm sure you have a few questions that pop through your mind throughout the lesson, and I'm just going to hit a little bit on some of the most frequently asked questions of students that I have when I teach this class. Most of them are about annealing, they're about safety, they're about the chemicals that we use, the issues of are they safe or not safe, and what the alternatives are. And we're going to get into that just a little bit. What is annealing and why do we need to do it? Think of your metal when you purchase it as a container, okay? And in this container you have a crystalline structure. And when everything is organized and in its place inside this container and it's all where it's supposed to be, your metal is considered soft. As you hammer it, fold it, twist it, turn it, drop it on the floor, do all the things that we do to the metal, you disrupt this structure inside. You disorganize it. You get it all rumpled and crumpled in there. And when it becomes disorganized, it takes up more of the space inside the container. So to get everything put back where it's supposed to be so that you can mess it up some more, you need to do annealing. And annealing is done in the case of metal with heat. You can anneal with a torch or you can anneal with a kiln. If you're going to anneal with a kiln, you put your metal in the kiln, you ramp it up to 1450 or 1450 degrees, and then you can pull the metal out and it will be annealed. And this is the formula for copper. Every metal has a different formula, but we're working with copper right now, so we're going to focus on this. So with copper, it would be 1450 degrees. If you're using a torch, you need a torch that gets hot enough, and you need it to get hot enough that it can disperse the heat evenly throughout the whole piece of metal so that you get the metal up to that temperature of 1450 degrees. And by the way you'll be able to tell you're at that temperature is you'll get a red glow. Not a red color on your metal, but a red glow on your metal. Once you've achieved the red glow throughout your metal, then you can quench it right away and then start working your metal. Some metals you should quench as soon as you anneal, and some metals you should let them air cool. So you really need to reference this before you start working on it. Okay, let's talk about safety just a little bit. If you're going to use a torch, then you should have a fire extinguisher. These go hand in hand. You don't use one without the other. It doesn't have to be as large as this. They have nice little disposable fire extinguishers you can purchase. They have these, they have bigger ones. You don't want to have it like up underneath you while you're working, but you want to have it in a place that as you are getting away from the fire source, you can easily reach the fire extinguisher and not have to reach through the fire source to get it. But always have one on hand. Check your expiration dates and be familiar with how it works. Don't just have it, but actually know how to use this tool. Another thing that you might consider are safety glasses. We're working with chemicals, we're working with metals, we're wielding hammers, and you want to really take precautions in the case of your eyes. So it's always nice to have a set of safety glasses around. You can get these prescription, you can get them very inexpensively at hardware stores. You can even get them that will fit over the top of your prescription glasses so that you can have the advantages of both. If you really have issues with using the chemicals, with using the pickle, then you can use Penny Bright, which is a citric acid. It's food grade, very environmental friendly. It is more work though. It's a paste that you put onto the metal and you scrub it on, and you scrub until you actually remove the fire scale. And then you have to make sure that you really rinse that off well before you apply the fire again. So if you're doing multiple steps, this one's going to take you a lot more time, but it is totally environmental friendly to do. If you're really persistent, you can just use a sanding sponge or a steel wool and remove all of your fire scale that way also. But then you're going to get scratches on your metals, and in the case of working with sterling silver, something that's really not something you're going to want to do. But these are the most well-known ways of removing fire scale. Once you have your chemical in your crock pot, it's plugged in, you're ready to use it, there's some really important rules about how to do this. First of all, it's important that you should quench before you put your metals into your crock pot, because when you introduce the very hot metals to the crock pot, it's going to sputter and splash, and you're going to get this solution around your table, down your crock pot, possibly up on your skin or in your eyes. So if you quench your metal first, then go to the pickle, it may take a little bit longer to clean, but it's a little bit safer for you. The other thing is, when you're reaching into your crock pot, you want to use a non-ferrous metal type of tong or tweezer. You could use bamboo chopsticks, you could use plastic, but really the most commonly used are the copper tongs or brass tongs. You could use sterling silver tongs, but they would be much more expensive and not as practical. But you want to have a non-ferrous with a non-ferrous, and this is in the case of sterling silver, gold, copper, anything that you put into the pickle pots. If you were to forget and you're working, say, with sterling silver, you can reach in with your cross-locking tweezers, and what's going to happen is all those copper oxides that have been removed and that are floating around in the pickle are going to electroplate to your sterling silver, and you're going to come out with a copper colored piece of silver rather than a silver pair. It's not the end of the world. There are ways to get rid of this, but it's very inconvenient and it's a nuisance. So try to remember, and the way I do it is I always keep my copper tongs right there on top of my crock pot. That way I know when I move the lid, they're right there, and I don't have, and it's just going to keep me from forgetting and using my cross-locking tweezers. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed what we did. I hope you're happy with your finished product and that you're excited about jumping in and doing a little bit more, experimenting some more on your own. I'd love to hear how you've done. And again, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.